Alrighty, so yeah, so thanks again. Welcome back to our first collector profile of 2023. So today I chose a name that we've seen a few times. It's not super common in our collection, but when I did an initial search online, I was pleasantly surprised to find a ton of articles, information, a lot of photographs of this collector, which is not always the case, obviously. So today I'll be giving some selected highlights, an overview of the life and career of Hugh H. Iltis. And so this specimen, you can see this example was collected along with Richard W. Holm in the tropical rainforest of Costa Rica. And it doesn't actually have a collection date on this one, but I did a little digging and it looks like similar specimens were collected in 1949. So probably in that time frame. The specimen itself is here. You can see it's growing on these little bits of bark and wood. So it doesn't say substrate, but I think we can assume it probably was some sort of decaying, rotting wood that it was growing on. The species is Peloseum chlorophyllum, which sadly I was not able to find a picture of a living specimen, but some information per the Flora of North America. This moss grows in Mexico, the West Indies, Central America, Northern South America, and the state of North Carolina, randomly. It likes forested, sheltered gorges, rotten logs, which makes sense by looking at our specimen, and exposed tree roots. So Hugh H. Iltis was a Czech-American botanist and environmental conservationist. He was born Hugo Helmut Iltis in 1925 in Brno, Czechoslovakia, which today is the Czech Republic. His father, who was also named Hugo, was a botanist and a geneticist, and he taught life sciences. He wrote an early biography of Gregor Mendel. And so the younger Hugo became kind of a botanist on his own quite early. So it's said that in the summers, they would spend their vacations hiking in the Bohemian mountains, and his father would quiz him on plant names. He started his herbarium at the age of 10, and his specimens were carefully mounted with labels and Latin names. I found this really great picture of him at the age of 12, I believe. And it says it's him with his first vasculum, so this little metal container that you'd use to store your plants when you're out collecting in the field. So very early start. The family was Jewish, and his father was a very vocal opponent to Nazi racial science. So they ended up fleeing to America in 1938 before Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. And they obtained their visas actually with the support of several notable scientists, including Albert Einstein and Franz Boas. And they settled in Fredericksburg, Virginia, where the elder Hugo became a professor at this University of Mary Washington College. And the younger Hugo Americanized his name to Hugh. So that's how you see him referred to after that. So after high school, Hugh enrolled here at the University of Tennessee, but the following year he was drafted into the U.S. Army. He served 2 years in World War II, working initially as a medic, but then as an intelligence specialist, due in part to his fluency in German. And several sources said he participated in the interrogation of SS officers, including Heinrich Himmler, who was considered the architect of the Holocaust. And he helped prepare documentation for the Nuremberg trials, so quite a position there. In 1946, he returned to the University of Tennessee, and it said that he sold his personal herbarium, which had grown to about 1,000 specimens, to help fund his studies. And he studied botany under a very familiar name, Aaron J, aka A.J. Sharp. So very familiar. Obviously, we see his name a lot on our specimens. And it said that Sharp's stories about the devastation and destruction of forests that he saw in his own research in Mexico made a strong impact on Hugh, and we'll see that later. So he got his bachelor's in 1948 and then moved to St. Louis to do his graduate studies at Washington University. And while he was there, he also worked as a research assistant at Missouri Botanical Gardens, which is one of our partners. And he basically was working on a big backlog of specimens that were neglected during the war. He studied plant systematics and taxonomy, specifically the caper family and the spider flower family. He made a number of collecting trips to the Ozarks, which are nearby, and also took a field trip to Costa Rica in 1949, which is probably when he collected our moss. And it also helped inspire his kind of lifelong passion for preserving the tropics. So he got his PhD in 1952 and spent the next 3 years working at the University of Arkansas, where he continued to study those caper and spider flower families until 1955, when he joined the botany department of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and that's where he worked the rest of his career. That's another of our partners. He was a professor and taught plant geography, taxonomy, grass systematics, and the history of botany. He directed 36 students to their master's or PhD degrees, and he also worked as the director of the university's herbarium, which today includes more than 1.3 million specimens. He continued his taxonomic studies of the caper family, but also became very well known for his work on the origin of maize, or corn as we know it. So the maize species, Zea maize, is believed to have been developed 10,000 years ago in southern Mexico from some unknown wild grass precursor, presumably in the Zea species or Zea genus. These wild Zea species are called teosinte. And so to study that genus, he led a number of expeditions to Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, Ecuador, looking in particular for a perennial species of Zea. So those that were known were annual plants, but they really weren't able to find it. So, and it was widely believed at the time that this perennial precursor was extinct in the wild. He even drew a picture of it on his 1976 New Year's card. You can see here, saying this perennial teosinte extinct in the wild. And he sent that to his friends and his colleagues. And apparently it really bothered, kind of annoyed one of those colleagues. So this was Luis Maria Villarreal de Puga, who is a Mexican botanist working at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico. And she challenged her students to prove him wrong. And they began an intensive search of the area. And one of her students, this Rafael Guzman, thought he might have found it in this kind of in the mountains of the Guadalajara region. So they contacted Hugh, let him know. And in 1978, he led an expedition up into the mountains to take a look at this species that they had found. And it didn't turn out to be exactly what they thought. So they don't think it was necessarily the direct ancestor of domestic corn, but it was a new species of teosinte. They named it Zea diploperennis, and it was also resistant to some viruses. So they're actually still looking at the possibility of hybridizing it with domestic corn to see if it can kind of help improve those crops. And fittingly, he featured it on his 1979 New Year's card, which I sadly could not find a picture of. But anyways, so he continued to study and write about the origins of maize throughout his career, but made some other interesting discoveries along the way. So in 1962, he was on an expedition in Peru to study potatoes. And he was stopped by the roadside to take a picture of a couple vicuñas, like these creatures here. And the story goes that he dropped his camera filter on the ground, and when he bent to pick it up, he noticed a tiny, tiny flower that he had never seen before. And so he collected it and brought it back with him, but kind of, I don't know, forgot about it or didn't have time. So 50 years later, he ended up describing it as a new species. So this Viola lilliputiana, which is Lilliputian violet, the name comes from the fictional little people in the Gulliver's Travel book, if you're familiar with that. And it turns out to be one of the smallest violets, one of the tiniest dicot plants in the world. You could see here, this is the specimen on a penny, so it's really, really tiny. And it was not found again. So it's only known from that one collection. It hasn't been found since, which is kind of interesting, pretty interesting and strange. And he also found a couple different new species of wild tomatoes, one of which ended up having higher sugar content and some other properties, and it has since been hybridized with commercial tomatoes to improve their flavor. So some practical applications, interestingly, too. So he described or revised over 200 plant taxa during his career. He wrote a wide range of publications on plants throughout the Americas, also locally in Wisconsin. So you can see his Atlas of the Wisconsin Prairie and Savanna Flora is still published and used today. And in addition to botany, he was an outspoken environmentalist and conservationist. So he advocated for preserving threatened habitats and protecting biodiversity. In 1960, he co-founded the Wisconsin chapter of the Nature Conservancy and worked with landowners to protect some of Wisconsin's most unique ecosystems. He led the campaign to ban DDT in Wisconsin, and it was actually the first state to do so in 1968. And he also called for bans on cutting virgin timber in the state. He helped establish Hawaii's Natural Area Law of 1970, and also to help create the Sierra de Manatlan Biosphere Reserve with the team at the University of Guadalajara to protect the homeland of wild teosinte in Mexico. So a lot of those species, wild species, are critically endangered. The species that they had found in 1978 was only found in a few square miles. So that was obviously really important to preserve. And he gave frequent lectures to students, peers, and the public about the importance of conservation. He was also one of the first scientists to recognize that human mental health is closely intertwined with exposure to nature. And this is called the biophilia hypothesis. The coin was termed by E.O. Wilson, but Iltis was writing and speaking about the concept in the 60s and 70s, which is well before E.O. Wilson wrote his book in the 1980s. So he retired in 1993, but remained active in his research and in conservation advocacy until his death in 2016 at the age of 91. So he received numerous awards for his contributions to botany and to conservation from a range of organizations, including the President of Mexico, the Conservation Council of Hawaii, the National Wildlife Federation, American Society of Plant Taxonomists, the University of Guadalajara. Who also gave him an honorary doctorate in 2007. And he was posthumously inducted into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame in 2017. His name is commemorated in two genera. There's Iltisia, which is an aster in the aster family, and Iltisiella, which is actually in that spider flower family that he studied for a long time. A volume of the journal Medica, which is the International Journal of Maize Research, was dedicated to him in 1996. And the Hugh Iltis Prairie in Savannah was created in his name in 1999. So I can't talk about Hugh Iltis without mentioning that he was not a universally beloved figure. So he is described as a very strong personality with very strong opinions. He could be very blunt in his criticism of people and policies that he didn't agree with. So I won't read all of these, but he's remembered in an article here from the Journal of Systemic Botany as cantankerous, opinionated, blustery, irreverent, abrasive, tendentious, outrageous, exhausting, stimulating, enraging, inspiring, intellectual, single-minded, passionate, and flamboyant, but also charming, supportive, generous, and encouraging to his students and his friends. So obviously a complex person, very passionate about his work. Specimen-wise, we have over 2,600 specimens in the Bryophyte portal, 1,400 specimens in the lichen portal, and 29,000 in the vascular portal. I did talk to our team actually at University of Wisconsin this week, and they had told me that they have a whole cabinet of lichens that he collected in Mexico that need identified. So there's obviously still more out there that's going to be added to these portals. Most of the specimens are mostly from North, Central, and South America, but there are some other additional kind of international trips that are represented. And I really like that you could kind of use the specimens to follow that story of his life. And I'll just show you kind of a few things. So for instance, this moss in our collection was collected by him in 1936, so when he was 11 years old. And that's before they had to flee Czechoslovakia. This lichen and this vascular specimen were also collected by him at early ages, so 1936 and 1937. Here you can see his name is actually recorded as his middle name, which I assume might have been to differentiate him from his father. There's a number of specimens from 1945 in France, so presumably he was out collecting while he was working for the US Army as well. You can see this moss here that was collected in Normandy. This little strawberry plant he collected on the wild strawberries he collected on the hillside, also in Normandy. Our moss, like I mentioned, and we have several like this, was probably collected on this field trip to Costa Rica when he was a graduate student. there's this is an isotype of that new Zea species that he described with the student Rafael Guzman from the University of Guadalajara. And then obviously there's tons from his work, more locally in Wisconsin. So very productive botanist, a very passionate advocate for preservation of natural areas. And I'll just end with a quote from him himself, who said, "Most of us are put on this earth to do one simple thing, and that is to be a good ancestor. Both from a biological and a moral standpoint, we must not do less." So honestly, there's a lot of information. This is just a summary. There's like an hour-long video presentation from one of his award ceremonies. So I'll share some of those links afterwards. The domestication of corn is also a rabbit hole you can go down that's quite fascinating. So anyways, hope you enjoyed it, and thanks again for listening. Stop my recording.